Great.
Thank you. So, I think we're going to start this conversation now. Breathing life into the night.
Yeah.
Maybe breathing music into the night.
Oh!
What's going on here?
What is happening?
So if...
Oh! Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for those of you who were with us at the Guggenheim last night and stayed until they pushed us out, this has given you some memories, I hope good memories, of how we, of how Karim helped us breathe life into the night. So, the night is pretty much alive already, right? I think we saw it yesterday, we see it probably every day, or at least once a week, hopefully. So I don't think we need to breathe life into it. I think it's a matter of channeling, it's a matter of shaping, it's a matter of nurturing that life and make sure that, we give it enough attention, we give it enough concern so that it really becomes part of the experience of a city. How do we do that? And I think we can look at urban planning for some of the lessons during the day to apply to the night, I hope. So Rana, I'll turn to you first. How do we do that?
So, excuse me. First of all, this is the first time in my life I've been on a panel with the VibeLab. So I'm very excited about this. I'm usually on very boring parents. But today I actually get to tell you the boring part of the story, how you have to balance economic prosperity and, with lighting in the streets and creative placemaking. And the VibeLab is going to tell us more about the fun part of the work. But just before we go into that, yesterday when I was listening to all of your presentations, I realized that we're talking about the hardware and the software of the city, right? So some of you guys were talking about the housing and economic development and how it's important to create jobs and have safe cities and all of that. But then underlying that, I was hearing all these other terminology that I took note. The economic value versus social value, the pride, greening with purpose, civic and social imagination. Example from Bogota, providing women with quality of life. In Ramallah, bringing meaning to the life of the elderly. And in Melbourne, we were hearing that how the city was losing its soul in the 1980s. So you can have all the housing and all the job, and if your city doesn't have the soul, it's not going to work. So I think what we saw last night, and obviously this was a last-minute decision to bring Karim on. This is exactly.
It was planned?
Maybe not. But that's what we saw yesterday. We see humanity in each other, and that's what makes us thrive as human beings and as society. And I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but going back to Aristotle and the whole idea of the political animal and how we thrive as a community, as a society, and I think bringing the city into a 24-hour cycle, or at least 20-hour cycle, I would say, that could make us experience these sort of shared fun events together. And it doesn't always have to include drinking or dancing. It could be, going to a tea house in, in Beirut or in Cairo, or my mom goes out every night in the city of Tehran to do her shopping at 7 or 8 p.m. because it's too hot during the day to go out. So it doesn't always necessarily have to include bars and restaurants and, expenditures like that. So I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, for sure. So, and thank you also, Greg, for that introduction. I do think if you're asking me, okay, so how do you do it? I think it's very important to always think about, when developing a nighttime vision for a city or a strategy, that it's always about the social, the cultural, the economic, but also, of course, the spatial and the sustainable. Those are the topics that we always work on when we're helping cities developing a nighttime strategy. And I really agree with you, Rana, as well. It's like the night has been demonized for such a long time. This goes back to ancient times, I would say. But it's also the moment where where things slow down, and there's a moment for reflection, but also for creativity in a large part. And that's what we always, when we have these conversations with cities, is always like. I like to, always point towards the fact that think about all the photographers, filmmakers, DJs, VJs. Like myself, I was a show director for nightlife events. Those are all people that develop their talents at night, and they end up being in the creative industry. And often you can say the most progressive, forward-thinking, and open-minded people come together at night, either through music, which is of course also a great filter to put people together, but it's also a way that that builds social constructs or creates social change even. Those are things that I think we really need to nurture and also support.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that. But just to stay on the point that night has been demonized, and this idea of nightlife, and we were discussing yesterday, about the transition from seeing it as nightlife to night culture and experiences of the city at night. Why do you think this has been demonized, and how do we move on from that perception? And then I'll turn to you, Rana, because I know that there are places in the world where it hasn't been demonized specifically. So, Mirik, first to you, why has it been demonized in our part of the world, and how do we transition from that perception?
Well, I think the short answer is always control.
Okay.
And
the longer?
No, but control people that think differently and that that come together. Like we always like to say, is many revolutions have started in a bar or in a tea house, for that matter. So that's often where we come together and share thoughts and build community and push topics, push social topics or demands or things forward. So. For us, it's very important to really how do we try to shift from speaking about nightlife and all the things that people the negative connotation you will often have with that, is to speaking about life at night. What is happening? What is happening in the other 9? What's happening in the other 9 to 5? And how can we accommodate that so that we have good coexistence between people that want to sleep and people that want to work at night or socialize. So for us, I think always the first step is to show that you are, that you are a decent, decent maybe, that you are a good partner to speak to, that you keep your word, that you try to build that relationship, and because this word was used many times also yesterday, but it's always when it comes to developing nighttime governance and nighttime policies, it's always about making sure that the bottom up and the top down works together. And especially at night, maybe that's not the most logic reaction, and that's why I always like to refer to myself back in the day to the rebel in the suit. So you need to speak the same language to get things done, and that's where it all starts.
So it's building those bridges. And so, Rana, first of all, tell us a little bit more about this empirical experience that you have. You saw your mother going to the tea house at night. So you know that there are places in the world where night is lived not in a demonized way, not through the party, animals or that sort of thing. So that vision of it has changed. How do we introduce those learnings into our context? But also, how do we use urban planning techniques and strategies that we have for the day at night?
Yeah. So, first of all, nothing wrong with party animals. We love them. But, yeah, I was talking to a few people here yesterday, and if I remember correctly, Kassam from Ramallah, they was telling me that they close everything at midnight for weekends, and I think 11 during the week. In New York, until like a few years ago, we couldn't dance in bars. Like you could drink but not dance. Like I don't know who comes up with these rules, but today over 100 cities have dedicated people for nightlife. They call them night mayors, night Caesars. I don't know, like senior advisors. But there are people who are like dedicated their careers to like nightlife. And actually, in one interview with the New York first night mayor, she was actually saying this is actually a daytime job, contrary to what you think, because a lot of it is bureaucracy and trying to like push things out of the door. And then one of the chapters in the book that my co-editor, Jason Shupak here, and we wrote a book, is coming out in December, about cultural planning in cities. And for us, the nightlife is part of the whole urban cultural ecosystem, is not necessarily because, you have productions and theater people and musicians, so that's part of the whole cultural ecosystem. And one chapter of this book is about the nightlife in London, written by Laya Ghosh, who was the night mayor of London, and that's part of the World Culture Cities Culture Forum. And they have this forthcoming study that basically saying that they looked at 44 cities that are part of this forum, and out of those, 8 cities include the nighttime economy in their city policies. Only 8, but these are like the usual suspects, like New York, Sydney, London, Toronto. And the other 15 cities are engaging with the nighttime industries, but they haven't developed a specific plan yet, or it's not integrated in their urban plans. And then 21 cities within this forum, they haven't really started looking at a vision or strategy specifically for nightlife. So it's something that it's getting established now as like a sphere in its own right, how to bring the nighttime economy into the urban plans. I don't know if you want to add anything, and then I can go into the zoning and other issues.
No, for sure. So I think it's definitely been an interesting journey. How there's now more and more cities, as you were saying, that have adopted nighttime governance policies and set up offices. What I think is interesting to know is that in 2020. We released a research paper which was published by Urban Studies, probably a journal that some of you might know, together with Andreina Sellas. What was interesting when we did the research about the rise of night mayors as a new form of urban governance after dark, we saw that the night mayor role, or night mayor club commission, night czar, as you were referring to, that they are all advocacy roles. So there's now over 100 cities that have installed a similar position as the one I created in Amsterdam. And whether these are located inside or outside city government. So in Amsterdam, it's an independent non-for-profit. In London, it's connected to the mayor. In New York, it was developed to a bit, so it's a city agency. But these are all advocacy roles. So none of the night mayors around the world have the power to change licensing by themselves. So they always need to go through either the city council or the city hall, or through a mayor. And whether you're on outside of city government, that has also had a lot of influence in, for example, a city like Berlin or Amsterdam and a few other places. They have the power to influence policy and decision making. But they are not the one pulling the strings. And so that's again where collaboration is essential in shaping the night.
Yeah, so it's collaboration, and as you say, it's an advocacy role, it's a connecting role, it's a bridging role, and I assume you need tools, you need data to be able to, and then you need the know-how to translate that into actionable ideas and plans, and then present and convince. So the importance of data and research, I'm sure you've seen it growing, and we were together in Rotterdam, I think 2 weeks ago, you presented the latest report. how do you find the tools, how do you find the importance of the tools in reshaping the mindsets for those cities about night culture? And how do you then translate those tools into practice?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for bringing that up. It was really great to work in Rotterdam and to deliver that study. It's called The Creative Footprint. Please look it up if you have time. We have done now 8 cities with the same methodology. It's really a cultural infrastructure mapping report, because we have now these offices around the world, but really often the night is governed, or the decisions are being made based on emotions. It's too loud, it's too noisy, we can't do this. Like that's the knee-jerk reaction, is to say, oh well, we have to stop this now, instead of coming with progressive policies and work together to strengthen that. So yes, there's offices now. It always takes a while for them to, first they have to organize themselves internally, and then secondly they're thinking of, okay, what kind of data, what kind of evidence-based approach can we use now to really install and to give gravitas and to install these new policies. So for example, this study, where we very much focused on the cultural infrastructure, and at night, that's the amount of creative spaces. So there's this notion, which you see now more and more, which definitely the younger generations are referring to, is these third spaces. And the third spaces are the places where you can come together, where you can interact with each other, where you can socialize, but which is not work or home, and which are becoming more and more important. Because we also really need to think about who has the right to the night, who has access to the night. Is the night only somebody for the more wealthy part of society, or should everybody have the right to enjoy themselves or to socialize at night? And this is, I think, a very fundamental question we need to think about, because the more community organizing that is happening at night, really often those are a lot of unpaid hours that are put into it. Definitely, when you look at night culture, there's a lot of community work and people really coming together because they really want to do that. And I would like to refer quickly to an example from an organization we're working with, which is called DS4SI, Design Studio for Social Intervention, from Boston, and they have created dance courts. So a dance court basically is a space where people can teach dance classes. The issue only is definitely in Boston, and definitely when you look at marginalized communities in Boston, is that if there's a bunch of young kids putting out a sound system or a ghetto blaster and starting to teach a dance course, this will lead to the police will harass them and will tell them to shut down and to stop these things. So that's definitely referring to what you said, Rana, before, is who has the right to the night, who can socialize and come together at night. And that's where we also need the institutions. So that's why we need the governments also as well, to make sure that these kinds of social interventions in the public space can happen without people being harassed.
Rana, you mentioned the book in passing, so I'm going to ask the same question to you about the importance of data and research without spoiling the book, which is forthcoming, so I haven't read it yet. There's a chapter there on nightlife, I understand. Can you tell us a bit about what you found, and does that reflect what Mirik was saying? Do you find it echoes it?
Yes. I have to point this out, that there is a huge difference between cities of the global north and global south.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't have as much regulation in cities of global south, which is a good thing, I think, in this case. So, these third spaces that we have to be very mindful of creating in the cities like New York, where I live, they're kind of very organically shaped a lot of times in cities of the developing countries, or even neighborhoods that are more ethnic within, at least in the US that I know. I worked in this Puerto Rican neighborhood in Philadelphia, and there was nightlife, that people just bring their own benches and, stools and sit out and talk and, have beer or, and laugh, and that was totally like part of the culture. And also I see this like in other cities that I go to, that, it's just so vibrant, and, these tea houses that operate from 9 a.m. to like, 12 a.m. So yes, so it's some of it is shaped more organically, but I think in the cities that are more concerned with zoning and regulation, there are very specific rules about merging the different types of commercial uses with residential uses, even when you have commercial overlays. I know in New York for a fact that even if you have like a commercial space, some of them don't have license to, let's say, have kitchens because they're in a residential area and the insurance doesn't let them to have that. So, I have a bar in my own neighborhood. There's a coffee shop and a bar, and they cannot serve food because of the exact same reason. So, so basically, some of the lessons learned from London is that, well, the first one is follow the data. I think it's also very important in terms of what we call the access to culture and cultural equity. Like for one of the projects that we did in New York for this cultural institution, that the concern was that most people were wealthy white consumers of culture, and we wanted to know what type of people are going and coming to this very like prominent cultural institution in New York, and we looked at cell phone data use, and as you all know now, if you have like 3 points of information, you can basically track anyone, so you can understand where people are coming from, and and we overlap that with the show times to see where is the origin of the people. And yes, there was all like wealthy, mostly white people coming to this like cultural institution. So it's very good in terms of understanding the access to the cultural offerings that the city has during the night. And then, yes, so the nighttime economy movement is led by cultural and creative institutions, as you say. So working with this industry institutions, I think it's important. And in the US, after the COVID, there was a package of $15 billion for performance spaces that were struggling. And this was because we had like, a lot of advocacy groups that specifically worked with this type of institutions. So there's no silver bullet. The challenges facing the nighttime economy cannot be solved with one single policy. So there's a portfolio of policies depending on each city's very unique policy environment that needs to be considered. And you can copy from other cities, but it's very difficult to like basically copy one from another. But two things I wanted to point out. One is the zoning policies that I sort of talked about very briefly. Mixed-use development is super important, and also cultural districts, as you know, designated areas for cultural production. The clustering of cultural institutions benefits everybody. And licensing and operating hours. So flexible licensing is usually it's important for the nightlife activities, extended operating hours, and allowing the venues to go further into the night. And also temporary or pop-up permits. They're some of the lessons learned from the book. Also, in terms of transportation and accessibility, even without considering the venues and institutions, we see higher ridership now at night. It's definitely increasing. So it means that people are going out more. And so, just making sure that there is like accessibility to late night public transit, I think that's pretty important. And also pedestrian-friendly areas. So a lot of it, I want to sort of bring it back to the place and tie it back to the place. There are policies that you can have as a citywide, but there are specific policies that are place-based, and it's important to have them.
Yeah, for sure. Especially what you're saying is referring to the global north and the global south. Definitely when it comes to safety at night, safety at night definitely for women and girls and other marginalized communities. Safety is of course a big part of being able to engage with the night. And in this space, we have been doing a lot of great work with UN Habitat and the Safer Cities approach. where we're really thinking about how can you integrate people in, how you can integrate the civic society in deciding what's the best way forward. And of course we are supportive in this collective and presenting about this topic as soon at WUF at World Urban Forum in Cairo. But it's the great work from all the people in that group that have delivered the knowledge there. And I just want to refer back. So that's like, when you look at Global South, that's something we have to think about when we are planning for the night. Mm-hmm. But when we're planning for the night in the Global North, then yes, it's important to think about extended opening hours. So a project I've worked on personally in Amsterdam, which I'm very proud of, was the introduction of 24-hour licensed venues. This doesn't mean that places stay open 24/7, but they have the ability to stay open and close when it's good for them. And what was really radical about this process, and which is really just announced like a couple weeks ago, that due to the work we have done in Montreal, Montreal will also have a 24-hour zone. Where the city, venues and other types of cultural spaces can stay open 24/7 and will be a huge driver for the local economy. But what's interesting about what we did in Amsterdam, and that hasn't happened so much, or at least I haven't seen it around the world, is that for the first time when we were deciding on who gets these 24-hour licenses, that the venues, the cultural spaces, they had to bid for getting this license, because it can be a huge asset for your building or for your place to get it. And we laid down a vision on what type of venues and what type of cultural spaces are we actually looking for. What is the cultural landscape at the moment in this city? What would be an added value, and what will add like cultural value to the city? That has led to that. I think Amsterdam has now a very robust scene. We started with 5 venues that got that license. Actually, there were a bunch that we decided, well, we had more licenses to give, but we only gave them 5 venues, because they didn't really understand yet what the intention for this zoning and planning was. And now it has grown to more than 20 places that have this. There's a lot of data has been gathered that there's not an extra pressure on the neighborhood. It actually, it actually supports this neighborhood development, and also because the venue has a purpose during the week. It's not that it's only like a nightclub at night, but during the week there's also a lot of great activity happening. So I think nighttime operators and venues and etc. They understand now what we are trying to achieve with this licensing, and I think it was a smart scheme, to create a bidding or a tender process to give this to these places.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a building toolbox of policies, and I really like what you said about not having a silver bullet. It makes a lot of sense to say that in Bilbao, which is the model which is often used as the sort of proverbial silver bullet to solve urban regeneration.
Well, there's one very big silver bullet that landed here, and it's helping the city really well, and it's a building called the Guggenheim.
It works for them, but not for everyone. And I guess, I like that, using that driving question of who has the right to the night as the sort of starting point to shape a policy. It almost feels like naturally the answer is everyone. And I guess you then build the regulations to find the right balance between that. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yes, of course. It's very often we need to get into a room together to discuss what's needed. I still see that there are many challenges. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's in my opinion, and that's I think how cities operate is very much about them to develop the land and develop the land prices and to bring that up. We all know that process, right? So really often to transform formal industrial sites and industrial areas and outskirts of the city, really often the night is been offered, or creators are being used to help to develop these things. And I would like to just pose a vision. Maybe it's like we need to think about what we're doing in 5, 10, or 30 years time. Like when we're building these new city cores, that we, think about first something is maybe a creative space or a nightclub or a venue, etc. Then it becomes like a cultural venue, and maybe it ends up being a museum, because if we would have saved the venues that have massive influence on our society in general, and really more thinking about what is the heritage, So we are currently also working on a project which is about preserving and archiving club culture. And there are so many spaces that really had a fundamental influence on people's lives, but we don't really know anything about that anymore. And I believe that we don't have, and I don't know if Paul's in the room from Bob Consultancy, but I'm stealing a few of his lines now. It's very much we don't have the institutional capacities to build that story and to build that heritage and to make sure that we preserve those untold stories, because it's very often like one narrative that prevails, and it was a whole ecosystem of people that are working in a certain space, and that's something that we really focus on at the moment. So yes, it's about collaboration, but it's also preserving what we had and what happened in the past.
That is very interesting. Rana, I saw you nodding your head. Do you want to react to that?
I was also in that conversation with Paul yesterday. But yes, so we were talking about actually like how there is an industrial area in New York City called Gowanus, where there's a lot of like art studios, and we worked with the community. It's not nightlife, but there are a lot of art studios that are being now gentrified. It's an industrial business zone, but but it's still being gentrified, building a lot of condos and grocery stores. So we actually did digitize a lot of these paper maps from the 80s to sort of understand how the studio space has grown throughout the neighborhood, and we made like a pretty awesome like animation. And I think now that when you show it to people, then people understand that, oh, this ecosystem has grown within the past 30 years. So if we do the same thing for other types of cultural and creative industries, I think tying it to place is very important. Otherwise, it's always going to to go away.
So tying it to places and tying it to communities. With the remaining 3 minutes that we have, I'll ask you then to give me perhaps an example globally of a policy or case, a model that has done it right in your opinion, or is trying to get it right maybe, and has impacted you. Starting with you, Rana.
I think that if you ask anyone in this room, you're going to get different answers.
Sure.
So for me, like within the United States, the city of New Orleans, I think it's for me, it's like such a happy place, and it has such a sad history, but you can always go to even like a neighborhood bar and someone's tap dancing and someone's offering you a beer and a sandwich, and it's affordable, and people are just dancing and happy, and they're drinking on the street, something you can never do in New York, at least you couldn't do before COVID. And it just seems to be like, they have like carnivals and festivals, and so I think that's just really what the soul of the city is. And I also have a quote that I would like to read from Robert Solow, who's a Nobel laureate in economics. Although I have not been able to verify this quote, I actually called his house one time to try to verify this quote because I found it online, but I couldn't find him. But anyway, it's a nice quote, whoever said it. Over the long term, places with strong, distinct identities are more likely to prosper than places without them. Every place must identify its strongest, most distinctive features and develop them, or run the risk of being all things to all persons and nothing special to any. Livability is not a middle-class luxury, it's an economic imperative. So this is from a Nobel laureate in economics that I find very insightful about like the place, how to tie it back to place.
Yeah, finding your identity. Mirik?
Thank you so much. Well, there's a lot to pick from, but I will try to pick a few which I personally very much like. We strongly believe that vibrant nightlife is very much built about the creative community. It's the creative spaces, as we have spoken about before, and of course it's then the policy framework, that ties everything in together. So when it comes to like the social aspect, we something which is really, and would love to chat to anybody that's interested about this afterwards. It's called an awareness academy. An awareness academy is a way to make sure that we have less discrimination and discriminatory behavior in nightlife and nightlife venues and any cultural spaces where people being taught and educated on how to interact with each other. When it comes to the venues, which is also of course such an important aspect of this cultural development at night. A really great example that was first came up in Berlin, but is now spread out to Amsterdam, Montreal, and many other cities around the world, which is called the soundproofing fund. And what a soundproofing fund does is actually that the city is actually providing money to music venues and grassroots spaces really often to help them sound insulate their places, because these grassroots venues, they are a fundamental part of of developing of culture. We always like to say no culture without subculture, and it's so important that these spaces that can exist. And it's not always like, the agent of change principle is important. It's not always the small music venues that need to sound isolate if a property developer has just acquired a piece of land and which the city sold for a lot of money. And when it comes to the last one, which is like the regulations and the policy development, for us it's very important to build that collaboration and to really build that nighttime governance structure. And it starts with small steps. You don't have to directly have a nightlife office installed, but it starts with having a conversation and writing up a little manifesto or vision, and that's where you all start.
Fantastic. And to answer the question, who has the right to the night? I'll keep that. And with that, I'll close us off. Rana, Mirik, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for World City for organizing. And thank you to Karim Asri, our guest star at the beginning from Espacio Open. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.